Okay, you can go ahead and stop me if you've heard this one before, but the Cardinals bullpen blew the game again. Is team management being too stubborn when it comes to this group of relief pitchers? We'll talk about it coming up on B-Schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. It's Thursday morning, April 24th, 2025. Cardinals on Wednesday afternoon took a tough loss to wrap up the series in Atlanta. 4-1, the Cardinals dropped the Miles Michaelis start, which was his best of the season. Miles goes 6 innings, shutout baseball. Really, really strong. 89 pitches, pretty efficient. But the Cardinals didn't get the run support to be able to put this one out of reach, and that meant the bullpen in the latter innings had to try to hold the lead. You definitely wanted to see more against Bryce Elder than you got, but that's baseball sometimes, as the Cardinals scratch off a run in the first inning, and they don't score again. But into the 7th inning, that had a chance to hold up on Wednesday. But when you get into this bullpen in 2025 so far, it just seems like unless you are able to rely solely on Kyle Leahy and Ryan Helsley, things have a chance to go off the rails. I'd like to put Phil Maton in the good category. He's been really, really good outside of really just one outing earlier this week. Those happen from time to time. But the rest of the bullpen has been a real challenge. I guess, too, I could include Steven Matz, but he's been like, do you categorize him as a bullpen guy, as a starter? What is he? He pitched on Tuesday for the Cardinals, did a really nice job. A big part of the reason that they were able to win the middle game of that Braves series. But largely, the guys that you're relying upon as the bridge to the 9th inning, they just haven't been getting it done recently. And it came to a head again on Wednesday as Oliver Marmol has to go to his bullpen after 6 to try and hold on to a 1-run lead. Here's the names of the relievers he brought in, and we'll talk about whether there are mistakes made in terms of the bullpen management, because that's what everybody's going to say, right? Oh, how could you bring in Ryan Fernandez? I don't think it's that simple. I don't really think that's actually the criticism here. There is a criticism to be had, in my opinion, but I don't think it stems from the way Oliver Marmol ordered his relief pitchers on Wednesday. Let's talk about it. John King, Kyle Leahy, who I have now termed Kyle Everydayhe is going to be how I refer to him from now on, because he pitches every day and he just gets the job done. He pitched in every game of the Atlanta series. He had scoreless appearances in every game of the Atlanta series. Has a 1.72 ERA on the season. John King, Kyle Everydayhe, Jojo Romero, Ryan Fernandez are the pitchers that we saw in the game on Wednesday. Of the 4, only Kyle Everydayhe accomplished his role successfully. He came into the 7th inning with 1 out after John King had given up the lead, and it was a tied score, 1-1. Leahy came in to finish out the rest of the 7th. And so the conversation begins. Well, why is John King in that spot? First, it actually started with people wondering, why Miles Michaelis? Why can't he pitch the 7th? I'm tired, guys. I'm exhausted. Please don't be that guy. Like, Miles Michaelis in 2025 gives you 6 shutout innings, approaching 90 pitches in April. You just shake his hand and say, well done, right? Like, we can't go after the fact and say, well, why didn't they let Miles Michaelis throw a 7th? He has like a 600 batting average against the 3rd time through the order. This is not what you want. No, you don't want that. Right? Let Miles Michaelis have the win. The bullpen needs to be able to cover for him. 6 innings is more than plenty. So we'll start there. That wasn't it. I don't accept that premise from any Cardinal fan, honestly. There were some who said, well, I wasn't the one calling for Miles Michaelis to be DFA'd last week. Okay, that's fine. But the combination of factors, you take what you got from Miles Michaelis. Again, I'll try to inform on this podcast when I can. And I'm here to inform objectively. It's just not a thing. Miles Michaelis going the 7th is not a thing in that spot. Take the win. All right. Let's talk about John King. There are people who said, well, why John King? Why does it have to be a lefty? You know, you say, why John King? Well, it's a lefty spot. Well, why? Okay, fair question. Jared Kelenic was the leadoff batter due up in that spot. He's a lefty hitter. Middle batter was a righty, and then Michael Harris was the third man due up in the seventh inning for the Braves. He's a lefty. So 2 lefties. Granted, this is the late innings, so just as any manager can do, Snitker says, I'm going to go to my bench. Stuart Fairchild comes in off the bench. He's a righty. He replaces Kelenic. So you have 2 righties and a lefty. But still kind of the key man in that inning ends up being Michael Harris, left-handed batter. You get John King for left on left. It's all you could hope for, right? Gives up the base hit to Michael Harris. You lose that battle. It is what it is. Doesn't have to be a lefty to answer people's questions, but it makes enough sense for it to have been a lefty, right? And if it's a righty, you're talking about, as we found out after the game, and really we could find this out as the game was going along on Wednesday, Phil Maton was unavailable. So he would not have been a righty to come in, and he probably wouldn't pitch the 7th necessarily anyway. Other righties, Ryan Fernandez, who we'll get to in a minute. Ryan Fernandez obviously has been struggling significantly. He's got an ERA over 11. But he was on the team, and we have said, dating back to the weekend, Sunday night, I came on this podcast and said they need to make a move. I would send Ryan Fernandez to Memphis. I would bring up one of those fresher arms and try to see if you can shake something loose with your bullpen that way. Do I think Ryan Fernandez is done for the year? Absolutely not. No. But could he use 15 days like they just gave to Chris Roycroft? I thought the answer to that was yes. The command has not been consistent enough for Fernandez. I would have made that move, right? I said so Sunday night. Rarely do I say that. Rarely do I come on here and say this is what the Cardinals need to do. But I did in that case. And I said, look, if they don't do this, because I had an inkling that they weren't going to, I said Sunday night, if they don't option Fernandez, what they can't afford to do is be overly protective with him. Because the best laid plans tend to blow up in your face when you say, well, I've got this reliever that I can't really use, but for specific circumstances. Because what happens? Those circumstances don't arise where you're able to get him some work. And then push comes to shove and you feel like he's the only option for this diabolical situation. And that's what ended up happening. Like Fernandez ended up with 2 strikeouts after giving up that home run. But he gave up the home run. Game was over because of that moment. Tough spot to bring anybody into. But in particular, it's a tough spot to bring Ryan Fernandez into. The guy that you're trying to protect. And so it is what it is at that point, right? I'm not even necessarily saying Oliver Marmol is to blame for bringing in Fernandez in that spot because, frankly, he probably was the best remaining option unless you're insisting that Matt Swanson should have gotten that spot. Another tough spot to bring a guy into for his, second career big league game. But he is a guy with some late inning experience, had the saves lead in Memphis before getting the call. So, sure, you can make that case about Matt Swanson. I feel like we're going to use this phrase of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. When you get into a spot that's so difficult. It's just difficult to imagine the Cardinals coming out of it. But how did it get to that point? Because Ryan Fernandez ends up being the GOAT, not in a good way. He gets the blame for the loss, the scapegoat, because he gives up the home run that makes it 4-1 instead of 1-1. So that you see the score change and it's his fault. That's the way we perceive it. What happened before that, in my opinion, was even more damaging because it highlights the rest of the bullpen continually not getting the job done. Jojo Romero comes in for the 8th inning. Again, he doesn't get his job done. Gives up 2 hits, records 1 out. That's been the story of his last 4 outings or so, where he gives it up. Can't get through an inning himself. That's been rough for the Cardinals. That's a guy that last year was nails for the Cardinals. Jojo Romero. Top lefty in the pen. Trust him in any spot. Trust him in the 10th inning when there's a runner on second base. Trust him anywhere. And now you've got a tie game in the 8th, and he can't come through and keep it tied. Gives up those 2 hits. Obviously, the runs didn't score with him on the mound, but he put those guys on base. Fernandez got him home with the home run that he allowed. 3-run shot. Fernandez comes in for the rescue of JoJo. Anytime that they've had a rescue mission the last week or so, it has not gone well for the most part, other than that Kyle Leahy yesterday. So Fernandez comes in to an awful situation at that point. You could say, there's all the different ways you could second guess. The point I'm making by shooting down almost all of these ways of Marmol should have done this instead of what he did, is to kind of illustrate the point that I don't think his bullpen management yesterday cost the Cardinals. Not at all. You can't tell me it was management of a bullpen that was to blame. When 4 relievers are used, use them in whatever order you want. 4 guys came in, 3 of them didn't do their jobs. Now you could say, well, Fernandez probably should have gotten a clean inning if you were going to use him. But you do try to find your lefty lanes and your righty lanes. And so if the start of the 8th inning, and I'd have to go back and look and see exactly who JoJo was facing, and I could do that now to make sure we're all on the same page about what happened here. But then he would have gotten the blame anyway, right? All he would have gotten the blame if let's say it was the spot where you could have gotten away with a righty going. Right? Ollie Marmol would have still gotten the blame because it's like, well, how could you put Ryan Fernandez in there? First batter up was Matt Olson in that inning against JoJo Romero. Yeah, you don't want Ryan Fernandez against Matt Olson. You don't want Matt Swanson against Matt Olson. Ozzie Albies was the next batter, switch hitter. So you're talking about just an obvious lefty lane. Sean Murphy, a righty, but that was actually a guy that JoJo got out on a soft grounder. So it was a lefty lane. It was a spot that made sense for your best lefty available. Steven Matz had pitched the day before, 2 2/3 innings. He wasn't available. You already used John King. Those are your lefties. With Libby in the rotation. Those are your lefties. So it has to be JoJo's spot, right? There's not a, oh, wow, what's Ollie Marmol doing aspect to this. I know a lot of people want to make it that, but it's just not true. It's just not, it doesn't reflect reality. There's a way to manage a bullpen, and you might say, well, don't be so cookie cutter. They need to really get creative. Okay, what did you want him to do? Some would say Ryan Helsley should pitch that 8th inning while it's tied. I don't agree with that. I understand the impetus behind it. If they're not going to throw Ryan Helsley in a tie game in the 9th inning on the road, they're not doing it in the 8th. It's just not a realistic expectation. And look, I fought with you guys on Friday night in New York when Lindor homered off of Fernandez. I fought that fight and said, you know what? I kind of think that there's some merit to Helsley pitching that 9th inning because it was as rare of a case as you could come up with, in my opinion, for a closer on the road in this specific scenario in a tie game in the 9th. The specific scenario being the Mets 1-2-3 of Lindor, Soto, and Alonso is maybe the best 1-2-3 in baseball. If it's not the best 1-2-3 in baseball, stay with me on this and let me know if this makes sense. It's the best 1-2-3 relative to that same team's 4 through 9. I think the differential between the Mets' top 3 and the rest of their lineup is a wider gap than any other team in baseball because I think their 4 through 9 is majestically mediocre. It's just fine. It's not a great 4 through 9 of a lineup. You've got a few guys that can burn you, but it's not anything like what their top is. So that would be a rare scenario where I would say, actually, you might be able to get away with some random guy like Ryan Fernandez, who last year wasn't a random guy. He would be a guy you'd trust in a 10th inning. But right now, he kind of just feels like a middle relief type that's struggling. But you could get away maybe with somebody like that throwing the 10th inning, even though they get a runner on second base against him to start, more than you could expect that same guy to get through Murderer's Row of Lindor, Soto, Alonso. That was my thought process in arguing that. Ollie Marmol's stance is you just can't do that. You cannot bring your closer into the road tie game situation like that in the 9th. Can't do it. Okay. Explains that thought process. Well, that's what it is. But what happens as a result of that, and I'm not necessarily dictating that Ollie should have been able to foresee this, although, well, let me say what happens first. What happens is you get so many days in a row where Helsley's not needed that when it's 10-4 on Tuesday, you pitch him in the 9th inning anyway after the Cardinals score those 6 runs because, well, you already warmed him up. He hasn't pitched in a while, and he needs the work. Fair. And on top of that, you expect you'd be able to use him on a back-to-back anyway on Wednesday afternoon if you needed him in the 9th inning because there's an off day coming up Thursday. Today, as we record this, Cardinals don't play. So I think all of that is something to note, even if it's not like a criticism, because I understand why they wanted to bring in Ryan Helsley at that point, get him some work, and you wouldn't have cost him the availability to pitch on Wednesday. And I just don't think he's ever going to do an up-down, and you can disagree with that. by up down, I mean he's going to pitch the 8th and then the 9th, or even get an out in the 8th and then pitch the 9th. But historically, his effectiveness has been a lot lower in those situations. We've talked about the contract aspect of this. I use Josh Hader as the guide, where with Milwaukee, he kind of had the same guardrails on. They didn't want to sign him. They didn't want to pay him his money for being the best reliever in baseball at the time. But then when the Astros got him and signed him, he's doing it all now. He can go back-to-back. He can go multiples. He can do both. He can pitch in the 9th inning, the 8th inning. It doesn't matter because there's an inherent risk to an arm when you're doing those things. But Josh Hader's a competitor, and now that he knows it's not going to cost him his livelihood, he's more willing to do those things. And his agent is more willing to say, hey, you got to put your foot down until you don't. And you might not enjoy that aspect of it, but I think it's a real thing when it comes to some of the guardrails on Ryan Helsley. And I support Ryan Helsley in that. I support Ryan Helsley's agent in that. I'm of the opinion that the Cardinals should pay him to stay around, or ultimately send him somewhere that he's going to get that extension, or have these guardrails and be willing to deal with the consequences of the business side of it when you don't want to commit to a guy long term to be part of your organization, despite being one of the best relievers in baseball. Them's the rules. All right, that's the way it works, and I agree with it. So don't come at me with this Ryan Helsley is soft crap. We're not doing that. You can say what you want, but it's BS. It's garbage. This is just the way it is, man. It's the way baseball is sometimes. However, I am giving all this background to say, like, a 9th inning on Friday would have led to Helsley having pitched a little bit more recently, which maybe would have led to Ryan Fernandez getting to pitch Tuesday in the 9th when it's 10-4. Instead of having his first time since Sunday, which, again, it's not like he had a ton of days off, so I don't even know for sure that he was available Tuesday. When you do a daily podcast, you have to acknowledge that there are things you don't know, especially if I'm not at the ballpark every single day. So those limitations that I have, and then when I come back and I find out some additional information, I'm always going to try to contextualize that in the next podcast, right? So I don't know for sure that Ryan Fernandez was even available Tuesday because Phil Maton wasn't available Wednesday, and he hadn't pitched since Monday. Sometimes at a certain point in the season, a guy needs 2 days off. And that's the other thing that we're not going to do. We're not going to go, well, Maton should have been available. No, that's not for us to say. That's from Ollie Marmol and Phil Maton to have that conversation to say. And when you look at Phil Maton having missed most of spring training and how much he has been worked already this season, Ollie Marmol has leaned on him despite really trying not to, right? They came in and tried to ease him in. They haven't been able to because he's been the most reliable guy, other than Kyle Everyday, excuse me. So that was a day where they said, look, we need to get these multiple days off in a row for Maton because over the long haul, we want to keep him fresh. We keep saying that, but we keep finding it really difficult to commit to keeping him fresh by not using him. The Cardinals have played 25 games. Phil Maton's pitched in more than half of them, and he didn't have a spring training. Like, they gotta find their spots where they can ease off of him. I agree with the Cardinals on that. I agree with Oliver Marmol on that. But you have that with Maton, rightfully. You have it with Helsley, where we talked about the guardrails. We're saying we agree with those guardrails. You have these other situations where relievers are not performing right now. And you're trying to have the guardrails of Ryan Fernandez getting into a specific spot to build his confidence back up, which ends up blowing up in their face because they couldn't find the spot, right? When they had the spot, they maybe Tuesday would have been the spot, but they needed to get Helsley work because his previous guardrails indicated that there hadn't been a spot for Helsley, right? We can agree with all of those guardrails being fair and reasonable. Here's another guardrail or something that impacts what we're about to talk about. Because I'm setting the scene right now because I told you there was a criticism that I had, but I haven't shared it yet, where I'm going to be overtly critical, and I don't think it's actually debatable too much. And look, maybe I'll end up wrong about this too, but I can at least tell you what my criticism is. Here's another one. They have a 6-man, and this is not the criticism yet. We're talking about still setting the scene for why it's difficult that the Cardinals have had this stubbornness with their bullpen right now. Steven Matz is sometimes in the rotation, sometimes not. And he was available for this Braves series, and so maybe it's not quite as applicable. But he throws 2 2/3 innings, helps you win that game on Tuesday, does a great job. But for the times where he is in that 6-man rotation, because you're trying to make sure the starters have enough to get through the season, and you're taking it easy on them early, which is a noble thing. I agree with it. and it's actually worked out. We've seen the Cardinals get a lot out of their starters so far. Right, so that's another guardrail, right? That's another thing you have to keep in mind when you're talking about. Normally, you have an 8-man bullpen of guys that are available, and it allows the manager to have some adjustability, some adaptability within a game, within a series. But you know that Steven Matz is not always available in the same way. You might have to use him in those 2 2/3 type of spots because he might be going back into the rotation, so you have to keep him stretched out. Right? So that's another, if not guardrail, it's context, at least, to how you have to manage the bullpen. It means you don't have Steven Matz, right, for a back-to-back necessarily yesterday because he threw too many pitches the day before that, so he wasn't going to be in there for that John King spot. If you're trying to hide John King from the big moment because he hasn't pitched as well this year, maybe Steven Matz would be considered your most reliable lefty, but you have to consider him for the rotation because he's supposed to go back into it next week. So there's another little guardrail that Ollie Marmol has to manage around and try to tiptoe around. So you can't. You have to throw John King in there. 8th inning, same deal. You can't. You have to throw JoJo in there. Those are your guys for those spots. It's not really debatable. It's not, how could Ollie Marmol? No, it's not that. Those are the guys that have to pitch in those spots. The only debate you could really have is Matt Swanson, that Ollie Marmol should have been more willing to use him in certain situations over the past week. However, I think if you were to sit with him and walk through each of the games and say, hey, show me the Swanson spots, you'd be hard-pressed to find too many of them. You could argue that the Fernandez spot on on Wednesday, when he gives up the home run to Eli White, was one of them. But that's a tough ask of Matt Swanson in his second game ever. So even then, I think you're nitpicking a little bit. Obviously, you didn't want it to be Fernandez if it didn't have to be because you're shooting that kid's confidence down even further. That being said, Ollie Marmol has enough experience with Ryan Fernandez from last year where I don't think Ollie is too worried about Ryan's confidence just, completely cratering and never coming back. I think he's seen enough moxie out of the kid to believe that he's going to bounce back out of it. And I'll bet you that Wednesday was actually part of that, to see him come back and get a couple of strikeouts and see some better stuff from his pitches. There might be that level of confidence that, he might not be sent down Friday. Ryan Fernandez might still be on this team when they get to Busch Stadium Friday. Right? We'll see. But that's actually the criticism I have. Now if you think he's starting to turn it around based on what you saw from after he gave up the home run in like I said, a diabolical spot to put a guy into on Wednesday, then so be it. Be stubborn about it if you're going to be stubborn about it. It is what it is. But I think it was a mistake inherently for the Cardinals to keep Ryan Fernandez up after Sunday night. I'm talking about before the Braves series ever began. That was the mistake in my mind. And you might say, well, Brenden, how could you say that? If Ryan Fernandez comes back and stays on the team for the weekend and pitches against the Braves and does well, he strikes out 2 in an inning of work, scoreless, and then does it again on Sunday. And suddenly he's fixed because it can take that little amount of time. Sometimes it doesn't take 15 days for a reliever to get fixed. Like Chris Roycroft is down there. He fixed his sinker. Don't know how he did it, but he's blowing guys away in Memphis, which is why I think we'll see Chris Roycroft somehow, some way on this team Friday. Whether it's for Swanson or Fernandez, whoever it's going to be for, I think Roycroft will be at Busch Stadium on Friday. That's my prediction. But when it comes to Fernandez, you had to manage a whole series tiptoeing around trying to find the perfect spot for Fernandez. All right? Let's do a little counting. Let's go back to the context and the foundation that I was building for this discussion. Fernandez, you're tiptoeing around. Ryan Helsley's got the guardrails. You know when you're going to use him. He's not available for those other spots if you need to get to the last inning with a lead, right? You're saving him for the ninth. Those are the guardrails. We agree. Remember, we agree with everything that they're deciding with this, but let's stack it up against one another and see how many of them there are. Should Ryan Fernandez be going into leverage spots right now? Of course not. Okay, I agree with that guardrail. Helsley, I told you I agree with the guardrails around him. Steven Matz, understanding of why he has to throw 2 2/3 innings on Tuesday. First of all, it won you the game that he did it. Secondly, if you're trying to get him back into the rotation, you're not going to be throwing him on back-to-backs. You're going to be building him up for a decent pitch count and then waiting for the spot where he's able to come in again and do it again. So that's the third pitcher. Who else we got? We talked about Fernandez. Oh, Swanson. You're looking for spots for him that are a little low leverage because you kind of want to ease him in too. Phil Maton, not available Wednesday because you need to be careful with him. He's pitched more than half the games this season. Didn't have a spring training. Need to be mindful of that as the long season goes. All right, I'm up to 5 now. 5 of the Cardinals relievers that have certain situations. Fernandez, Helsley, Maton, Steven Matz, Swanson. Who's left? Well, you got the 2 lefties, John King and JoJo. So when there's lefty spots, those are the guys that have to come in. Oh, and then there's Kyle Leahy, the one guy that every day he can pitch every day, and he's amazing, right? He always comes through for you. His arm will fall off as a result, right? That's what the criticism would be there. But they believe him to have a rubber arm. He's like last year's Libby, where it's like, yeah, just throw him into any situation. He's just gonna post for you. And so far, I don't disagree with him on that either. Leahy's been unbelievable. He's been team MVP status. I know they're 10-15, but what he's done is remarkable. Should be praised for it. But that's my point is this. That's your 8 relievers. That's your bullpen. I named everybody and told you what their roles were and told you what their limitations were. Just to point out that you don't have any other options if you're Oliver Marmol, but that is specifically why it's a mistake to go through that series with Fernandez and Swanson both that you're afraid to use. I'm not going to be right about everything. I'm going to be wrong a lot when I do this podcast, right? The Cardinals inherently are going to know more than I know every time. But there will be times where I see something playing out and I go, this time I'm going to go ahead and go out on the limb and say they messed this one up without really kind of pulling the punch. And this one they messed up, in my opinion, for the reasons that we laid out. When you have all of these guardrails that are good and noble things on a group of pitchers that you have to adhere to, you cannot afford to have the number of guys that you're trying to use kid gloves with and be careful with. You have to trust them in the spots, which is why you see Ryan Fernandez in that spot, because the roster dictated on Wednesday that he had to be in there. But that's why it's a problem, because I don't think there was anybody outside of that clubhouse that thought Ryan Fernandez was ready for that spot in his next game after the previous one in which he struggled. He had a tough weekend in New York. But the roster, as it was constructed, dictated that it basically had to be Ryan Fernandez's spot, or you could nitpick and say it needed to be Swanson. But I'm not going to spend a lot of energy telling you why Marmol screwed it up. It should have been Swanson, because I don't believe that myself. I look, Swanson might be something, but is not a guy that has missed a lot of bats in his minor league career. And you're coming into a situation where you need 2 strikeouts. Fernandez ultimately got them. He just gave up the home run first. But Fernandez, like, you're gonna think I'm sounding insane when I'm saying this. Fernandez was the best option for that situation on the roster. Needed to have other guys on the roster instead. If that's true, that's why I would say I think that's where the mistake was made. It was made Sunday. Allow Marmol to manage the bullpen with a little bit more in the way of optionality for who he could go to in some of those spots. Tuesday was managed incredibly efficiently. Monday was another game that they blew with the bullpen, but that was JoJo and Maton. Like, those are your guys for the 8th. Maton hadn't given up an earned run all season. It happens. I can't blame bullpen management for Monday's loss. Tuesday, I can credit bullpen management for why they won. But bullpen management also goes into the pitchers have to perform. Steven Matz doing his job, going above and beyond. Kyle Leahy going above and beyond because he pitched an inning after pitching Monday. That's why you win Tuesday, in addition to what the offense finally gave you. Wednesday, the offense kind of gets off the hook, right? And this is something that Ollie Marmol talked about post-game, and I believe they posted this on MLB TV. So I want to share this audio with you guys from post-game, from Ollie Marmol talking about the bullpen situation. And again, it might be a key and a look into why these grand changes that everybody's hoping to see still may not happen prior to Friday, although I would expect Roycroft back one way or another. But it may not be Fernandez that gets optioned. It could be Swanson. Because if the viewpoint is Swanson is just not trusted for those spots because he doesn't miss enough bats, whatever, then Roycroft would be somebody that a Chris Roycroft that has the sinker cooking, because I'd have to go back and look. Was it first and second or second and third yesterday when Fernandez gave up that homer? Because if it was second and third, it's different. But if it was first and second, you can make a case that Fernandez could still come in and get you a ground ball. Didn't necessarily need 2 strikeouts. But let me look at this. I'm sorry for doing this on the fly. No, it was second and third. So you could make the decision to walk somebody and set up that double play. The Cardinals have tried to do sneaky things like that with Roycroft before. You remember last year, though, he couldn't field his position. He was getting all the soft contact you could ever hope to see, but he was struggling to field his position, so that's why that didn't work out. But the sinker, if you look at, I can't remember who tweeted it out, but I'm going to find it because I want to make sure to give credit. Jacob E_STL said, I'm not sure what happened, but Roycroft's broken sinker is now genuinely better than ever. And he's showing the StatCast data behind it. Velo, steepness, depth are all trending upward. And he's got some videos there where the sinker just looks wipe out. Like if they had that version of Roycroft in the bullpen, you'd be talking about him coming into that spot probably yesterday, potentially walking a batter to load the bases, and then striking out two guys or getting that ground ball double play with the sinker. I think would have very much been in play. Now, Roycroft's 15 days weren't up yet since he had been sent down, and so you couldn't have done that. That wasn't an option. And maybe that's part of why they didn't do anything on Sunday with Fernandez or anybody else, because they said, well, Roycroft is close. He's looking better. We're getting good reports on him, and when he comes back, then we can make a move for somebody. But for now, do we trust Riley O'Brien as somebody to bring into a spot like that? He's walked a lot of guys when he comes into the big league level. He's got 14 strikeouts in 7 innings, but his walk rate is pretty high. Ryan Ludus, do you trust his stuff to be in that spot, strikeout spot? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Andre Granillo, not on the 40-man roster, but has been a good back-end reliever in Memphis this year. What's your trust level in that? Like, they clearly just didn't feel that it was worthwhile to do that with Fernandez. But I think it cost them in this Braves series. I really do. That being said, maybe they didn't want to wait 15 days for Fernandez to get it fixed, and they felt like he could do it on the fly at the big league level. But if that's true, in the context of, remember all the other guardrails we talked about, the whole bullpen's got guardrails, except for the two lefties, King and Romero, and their guardrails are just that they haven't pitched very well. And so you're risking giving up runs when they come into games, giving up base runners when they come into games. But you have no choice. Those are your lefties because of the Steven Matz unavailability after pitching so many pitches, and he has to throw so many pitches so he can go start next week, right? Guardrails. All of those things are good, noble, and necessary. But when you add them up, I don't think it affords the Cardinals the luxury to be as stubborn as they've been with Ryan Fernandez. Now on the other side of it, now that you've had an off day baked in on Thursday, maybe you can have that stubbornness. Maybe it's Roycroft for Swanson, and they say, I'm telling you, Fern is close, and we're going to be better for him these next 15 days than not having him if he's stuck in Memphis. Unless an injury happens, and then you can bring him back up sooner than the 15 days. But I feel like instead of waiting all week for a spot, because you could argue that he gained very little from Wednesday. Now, he might have gained something in the couple of strikeouts against big league hitters that he had after the home run, but then he's still sitting there postgame thinking about how he lost the game and blew it for everybody, which is an aspect that Ollie Marmol, I wasn't there, obviously, but I read from different reports, was talking about with the reporters before the game, which is like it's different when a reliever blows a game than when a young player at the plate goes 0 for 4. Like Jordan Walker goes 0 for 4. He's struggling at the plate. He's probably feeling down on himself. He doesn't inherently cost the Cardinals the game in the key moment, right? It's the reliever that gives up the home run that everybody's pointing at and saying, you got to do something about this guy, right? There's more of an emphasis on that moment because it's a loud moment and you can't hide from it. And that's true. And it's not fair that that's the way it is for relievers. But at a certain point, when you're trying to find the perfect spot for them, it gets very difficult. A week goes by, and did he gain anything? Because Sunday was bad. Monday, Tuesday doesn't pitch. Wednesday, trying to find that perfect spot, can't do it. Psyche goes down even further because guess what? He gives up another game because he had to go into that spot. There wasn't any better option out there because of all the limitations on the rest of the relievers right now. So when you have that many limitations for that small of a group, you might have to have somebody out there who you can go to. Organizationally, they just might not trust the guys that are at AAA. But I think at a certain point when the bullpen's struggling like it is, even if you don't think those guys are any good, you have to maybe give them a shot. You have to maybe swap somebody out and let them prove that they're not any good. Let somebody else do the failing, or maybe they'll surprise you. Because I would call back to the beginning of 2024. Guess who Oliver Marmol didn't really trust and didn't necessarily think was ready for those big situations and was very, very careful. We saw weeks go by and he didn't ever pitch at the very beginning. Ryan Fernandez. Right? Like the guy that now we've got his back because we know what he's capable of doing for us. He at one point was not trusted for those key spots. And it was very very ticky-tacky to wait to find the perfect spot to get him into to see what he was made of. And eventually you just had to throw him. That can catch up to you as a manager sometimes. And I think we're kind of seeing that with the Swanson thing. And again, I don't know if Matt Swanson's any good either. I'm not saying it's the same situation. I'm not saying it's apples to apples. But at a certain point, I do think you have to find out. And so having Fernandez on the roster for the Atlanta series was costly, and it costed them a game, potentially. And again, maybe it didn't, because the Cardinals would have had to score a second run on Wednesday, and they never did. But maybe with somebody else on there, like, could Riley O'Brien have pitched the seventh inning? Maybe, instead of John King. Or could he have pitched the eighth inning instead of JoJo? Maybe. Probably not. It's a lefty spot. Really, having Libby and Steven Matz in the rotation, or like earmarked for rotation reasons, has kind of hurt them, because they don't have another lefty in the organization that they can turn to. Like, you don't have one. You don't have one to call up. Going out and finding one would be nice. I don't know if there's any free agent lefties that you can pay $1 million to, $2 million to, like you did to Maton. Might be worth it, but at the same time, they're not in the mode to spend money. They're 10 and 15. They can already kind of see the season maybe slipping away, developmental time. But like from a win that day perspective, you got to have reliable lefties. And right now, John King and JoJo are just not getting that job done. So when you have all these things going on, that's my full point. I would have, and I said it Sunday. This isn't me like coming out after the fact. I said, hey, I would option Fernandez tonight, get somebody else up, see what they're made of. If it was somebody that you don't trust a bunch, like if it's O'Brien, but you're not sure about him. Like, honestly, Granillo should have been up by now. Good righty. Has some good numbers in AAA. He's not on the 40-man. But there's guys on the 40-man that you could lop off there. I'm not going to name names, but I looked through it and I could find 3 of them where you just go, this guy's probably never getting used. You can make that move. So it could have been done, and then you could have said, all right, well, now Roycroft is better. Bring him up for Friday. That guy that we brought up for just a 3-day stint, whether it was O'Brien or Granillo or whoever it would have been, you could have done Nick Anderson. You could have put Nick Anderson on the 40-man and said, here's your shot. We're going to use you during this Atlanta series because we need, we just need some coverage. If it doesn't work out, they can send him on his way. DFA him, and if anybody claims him, great. If not, he goes back to Memphis or says, I want out, because he had that out in his contract. I think that's coming up anyway, where he can leave the contract later this month. I want to see if I can find the date on that for Nick Anderson. Upward mobility clause, which allows other teams to poach him if they were to place him on the 40-man roster. I don't know. Okay, that opt-out is May 30th, where he could just completely opt out of the deal if they don't bring him up by then. But I think then there's a clause prior to that where another team could add him to the 40-man. Nope, that would have been prior to opening day. So anyway, and that didn't happen. So yeah, that's May 30th. But at a certain point, you're like, well, what are you doing with Nick Anderson sitting in your Memphis bullpen? Either he's going to be helpful to you this year or he's not, right? If this is a year where you're transitioning, finding out about younger players and what your future is, Nick Anderson's not part of your future. He's 34, right? Like, he can help you now or he can't help you ever. So they've got till May 30th, obviously, before he can totally opt out. But have him, or have somebody that you don't want to lop off the 40-man, but you're able to bring up, and then you have for the season, he can be part of the Memphis shuttle like Granillo. I would have done that for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then swapped out that guy or Swanson. If you saw some Swanson and didn't, weren't impressed, you can send him back down to Memphis, keep him on the 40-man for Chris Roycroft if he's ready to come back, which he looks like he is. They have to have Roycroft on this team on Friday, in my opinion. So they could have been shuttling, right? They have all these guys on the 40-man roster. Shuttle them. Use them. You should never run out of arms, because you can always use these fresh ones. If you don't think they're that good, that's fine. Guess what? Ryan Fernandez hasn't been that good, and he's got options. John King hasn't been that good. He's got options. Now, he's a lefty, so we talked about that. If Steven's going to be in the rotation, you can't really afford to option John King. And JoJo does not, I don't believe, have options, and so you can't option him. But they could have had a little bit more coverage for the week and still been able to accomplish all their goals, other than maybe having Ryan Fernandez available to them for this Milwaukee series and then the next week, right? If they had optioned him, they would have had to have waited 15 days to bring him back. Maybe that's what he needed. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's going to be nails against Milwaukee and stay on the team. Probably that's what's coming now, honestly. Now that I've gone on the limb and I said, here, they should have done this. But it doesn't negate that they lost a game because of it in the Braves series, arguably two. Maybe not two, because Monday, again, it was the the key eighth inning guys that you would have wanted in there, and they blew it. That happens. Sometimes you're best against their best and you lose. But if you had other options that you trusted, and like the other part is, even if they didn't want to option Fernandez, if they're not going to use Matt Swanson, but maybe he's the one that's considered more reliable than anybody else that's down there other than Roycroft, and so that's the guy they went with. It shows that there's a little bit of stubbornness in terms of like who to trust in the bullpen. It takes time to warm up to a new guy into that circle of trust, but it may have been what the Atlanta series called for, and from a front office standpoint, they didn't do anything. And Ollie was insistent too that they keep with the guys that they had. So that's part of it. But I teased this audio from postgame Wednesday. I did find it on MLB.tv, and so I'm going to play it here from the film room powered by Google Cloud. It says, I'm going to play this. This is a little bit on the bullpen conversation and maybe how Ollie Marmol views it. Now, whether this actually happens in terms of, not bringing up anybody new, but he's definitely giving a message to his bullpen with this quote that's like, you're the guys that are going to get us through this. Don't lose faith. Here's that quote from Ollie Marmol.
There's a couple things going on, and we're continuing to work hard, and Dusty and his group are working hard to get it back to where it's effective and you can use it in leverage. And that's the part that's been tough is when you look at our games, there's a lot of games you want to be able to use them in a lower leverage situation to get him right. You look at the style of play right now and the games that we've been in, there's not a whole lot of low leverage, right? There's a lot of one-run ball games, a lot of tied ball games, so he has to pitch. And it puts him in a tough spot because the game flips, and it's easy to sit here and say that's where the game was lost, right? But when you're in this many tight ball games, it's hard to do. But you do have to be patient, right? Like if you put yourself in the player's shoes, okay, a reliever comes into the game and it doesn't go his way. He's on an island. The game flips. The game's usually over. A position player goes 0 for 4, 3 strikeouts. You run him back out there the next day and the next day, and you give him the ability to get out of it. A reliever, you don't feel like you have that luxury. It's very reactive, but this is who we got, and we got to get them back on track. There's nothing coming from down below where it's going to change what's going on up here. We have to get these guys better, and the only ways for them to pitch. It's absolutely frustrating. But damn, we're gonna keep going with them. We got to continue to encourage them. We got to continue to get on the other side of this. It's just part of the game.
I don't disagree with anything Ollie Marmol said there. Got to be honest with you. Like, that's what he's got to be saying right now. He's got to have Ryan Fernandez hearing that. He's got to have JoJo hearing that. I don't know who the question was about specifically, but it doesn't really make any difference. It's applicable to all of them, right? There's a lot of guys that they want to kind of ease back in, and you just can't because the game doesn't dictate it. The situation doesn't come up to be into that ease mode, and they just have to try to have confidence and get those guys through it. That's what the manager of the team should be saying. I don't disagree with any of it. I do think there could be something coming from down below, though. That's the front office's ability to mix and match the roster and give them some fresh arms. There's communication with Mozeliak and Marmol on, like, well, don't give me that guy. Like, that's not going to change anything. And so, like, they can talk about, who might actually be able to help from down below. And if Roycroft is throwing the sinker like he has been, he's an example of somebody that could be helping from down below. But if you're Ollie Marmol, you're not going to say, yep, these guys stink. I don't believe in them. So, like, don't go crazy hearing a quote like that from Ollie Marmol and saying, oh, my gosh, how does this guy say that? Understand the game that's being played. Understand what he's got to say to be able to try to get the most out of his players. As a manager, that's the manager I'd want to play for if I'm a player. The guy that's talking like that about my struggles in the bullpen. And he's right when it comes to the scapegoat of a game like that is always the reliever, not the guy that goes 0 for 4. We spent 45 minutes just now talking about the bullpen and the problems with the bullpen. I didn't tell you one box score of a hitter from this game. Walker did go 0 for 4. Vic went 0 for 4. Gorman was 0 for 3, but did score the only run in the game on a first-inning walk. Nootbaar had a couple of walks, but was 0 for 3. Cardinals only collected 7 hits. Pozo, Mason Wynn, 1 for 4, 1 for 4. Arenado, 1 for 4, but had the RBI. But we could go up and down the lineup. Wilson Contreras, 1 for 3. He was on base twice. Again, he's up to a 200 batting average. He's going to get that OPS up closer to 700. Maybe not by the end of April, but it won't be long after. I'll still say he does it, though, for now. He's a homer or two away from really jolting that thing. But we spent the whole podcast talking about the pitching, and it kind of proves Ollie's point where it's like you guys say that, this is who blew the game. the position player that goes 0 for 4 gets to bat 4 times again the next day. The reliever has to sit there and stew about it until we find the right spot to bring him into, and then we got to put him into that situation. And if he has another equivalent of an 0 for 4, he doesn't do his job. He feels like he let the whole team down. Position player that does that doesn't feel like he let the whole team down because you got 8 other guys batting. They could have done their job. So that's what is inherently tricky about this, and it's why, knowing what Ryan Fernandez has given them in the past, it's why they want to stick with him. I think that stubbornness costed them in the Atlanta series. Now that you're through that, look, I've said I'd still would option him. But the more I think on it, you can make a case that you option Swanson instead for Roycroft if they simply aren't going to trust Matt Swanson. And you did see a little bit of a glimmer from Fern with the 2 strikeouts on Wednesday after the homer he gave up. People are going to think I'm absolutely bat bleep crazy. But that might be the move that actually makes more sense. If they're going to be stubborn with it, right? Like they've already gone this far, and Fernandez got you 2 strikeouts thereafter. Maybe those 2 at bats he found something. The pitch that he threw for the home run was just mislocated. It had the movement on it that he wanted, I believe, but just didn't threw it right down the middle. He knows it. But was that enough to kind of lock something back in? Maybe it actually was. And I would feel bad for Swanson, who didn't get much of a chance. But, like, they got to manage with the guys that they think they can win with. And that's what's on the line, right? They're not doing it on purpose to lose games. If they think somebody is better than somebody else, to give them a chance to win this weekend against a divisional rival, Milwaukee Brewers, first time seeing them all year, that's who they're going to go with. So it could be Roycroft for Swanson. It could be Roycroft for Fernandez. We'll see, man. We'll see. But like I said, those are some of my thoughts on what came to pass over the last week or so, specifically the Atlanta Braves series. And Cardinals had the off day on Thursday, so hopefully longest podcast we've done in a while. But I thought there was a lot to break down. So let me know if you're enjoying this kind of content. Let me know what I could do better. Again, you may not agree with everything I say, but I'm always going to try to be fair and contextual and outline everything that I think is relevant. So appreciate you guys for listening. If you want to support the content that I do, one way you can do that is by joining the YouTube membership, either $5 or $10 a month. $10 gets you the Discord membership as well. You just have to DM me and say, I want to be into the private group chat. That's just another way to support the channel. Let me know, too, if you've got a local business that you would like to have shouted out on the podcast, become a sponsor, become a partner. That's something that I can always incorporate as well. Appreciate Hastings Layers Premium Eggs. We don't have it down on the farm today because we've gone so dang long, and they didn't play. Well, no, they did. They did play games yesterday, probably, didn't they? Let's go ahead, just because. Yeah, I don't know why I thought it was Monday yesterday. My days are all off. It's Thursday today. Going to the Blues game, covering that tonight for Sports Hub STL. They didn't play. Memphis did not play on Wednesday because of rain. So there you go. So we haven't missed anything as far as down on the farm. But shout out to Hastings Layers Premium Eggs. That will do it, though, for this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.